So, welcome to the Kanban Coaching Exchange this evening. It's great to see you all tonight. On our rundown to Christmas, and Christmas is my favourite time of the year, so I start to get extra happy at this particular point. So, tonight I would like to welcome Kert Peterson. First time Kurt's come to the Kanban Coaching Exchange. I don't know why I didn't think about it sooner, but Kert is based over in Canada. And he's an accredited Kanban trainer for many, many years through the Kanban University. Is highly regarded, highly knowledgeable. He's one of those guys, if you've got one of those questions, he's the sort of person who's going to know the answer to it, or at least have some sort of practical experience in that space. But he's not a one-trick pony. He's also a certified Scrum trainer, so definitely has vast experience in that whole transformational space, as well as leadership, and just generally what it takes for business agility within your organization. So I'm very happy to have him here tonight joining us. Welcome, Kert. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Helen. It's great to be with you. I'm joining you from Calgary, Alberta. I'm a native Texan, and I know we have someone joining us from Texas today. There's Tim. I live now in what's called the Texas of Canada. Alberta is a province that's very rich in oil and gas and agriculture, and we have the Stampede Festival every summer. If you ever make it up here, come in the summertime, it's fantastic. Or if you're a snowboarder, come in the wintertime. It's a great place to live. Uh, this is a picture, and I am your presenter here. Quick question for the crowd: what year was this taken? Any guesses based on the hair and the clothing?
Well, the good news is that it's color. So, that also gives us a little bit of an indication.
1978.
78's a good guess. A little beyond that. Any other guesses?
So it's earlier than 1978.
No, so it's later than 1978. A little bit later, couple years past that.
Oh, you gave the answer.
81.
1981.
1981, you got it. And I'm sharing this in part because I feel like this session for me is a chance to play and hang out with peers and unpack and explore stuff together. Um, and it also speaks to my real interest in dynamics. How do people come together and, well, coexist, but then also build stuff together and create things together? And what are the dynamics at play in systems? Families are our first system that we arise out of. And then often in our organizations, we bring patterns from our family systems into those organizations, into our teams, into our business units. And so I'm kind of setting the stage for what I hope is a fun exploration around some of the ways that we interact and get stuff done together. Like I mentioned, I'm originally from Texas. I live in Canada. A couple pictures of Canada. Here's the more formal slide, you could say. I have a background in software development, software engineering, and project management. In 2004, I met Ken Schwaber in Austin, Texas, and he set me on the path of becoming a Scrum educator, trainer, coach. And then I met Alexi in 2018. He set me on the path of becoming a Kanban practitioner and ultimately a trainer. And that's sort of been my journey is sort of one starting with the technical space and understanding more about, managing things through, traditional project approaches, and then just really immersing myself in the world of learning and coaching and training. Um, my lineage is very rich, and I share this because, Helen, you mentioned I can answer questions. The only reason I can answer questions is because I had a lot of ears to bend over the many, many years that I've been, studying and training in Kanban. Alexi was my original trainer in Seattle, as was Janice. And Brad was the first. Brad Hughes lives on the East Coast of the States. He's a fellow Canadian, though. One of the first mentors I had in Kanban, and I've had many people who have really just enriched my whole understanding of Kanban. And it's always interesting because I get in conversation with someone who's deep in their craft, like these people, and I'll sort of ask a question that's a little offhand, and they'll say something that made me realize, wow, I didn't know that. And that's sort of the nature, I think, of Kanban is continual deepening of understanding and application of these concepts and principles. And I definitely want to say thank you to David Anderson. I am a Kanban University trainer. He's been the writing he's done, the books he's published, the force he's been in the industry has been monumental in my life, and I'm deeply grateful to everything he's offered and continues to offer me. So just have a deep appreciation for him as sort of the one of the tap roots of my own lineage. Rand is a gentleman, a fellow Kanban trainer in Minnesota, who is the source of the title for this talk today. So Rand contacted me last year. He said, "Hey, you want to do a talk on our meetup?" I said, "Sure." He said, "What do you want to talk about?" I said, "I don't know, throw something out." And the title he threw out really inspired me to think more deeply about why there's often resistance to considering or adopting, Kanban as a way of working. I would love for our time together here to be an exploration. In fact, I'm kind of setting the stage for it to be an exploration where um, we're able to ask questions, to unpack things, to be curious together. And I certainly have an experience I'm going to bring to the table and lots of ideas. And I'm really want to make this a place where you can contribute yours and we can enrich everyone's experience. Um, there is a slide. I'm going to be using Slido interspersed through various through this presentation. So you can pull up your phone and join now. In a moment, you'll get a poll. We don't have any polls yet, but I just wanted to alert you to the fact that we will be using Slido to kind of get people to weigh in and provide input and kind of enrich the conversation. There's three questions that I am framing today's session with. The first one is really, you know, what are the pros and cons of bringing a process framework into our teams, into our organizations, into our enterprises, and applying it, in implementing a process framework. Um, what patterns, sort of what relational patterns and larger forces are at play, when we're trying to achieve something? Most of us bring a process framework in to attain business agility or to reduce time to market or there's some outcome that usually we're after. What are the forces and patterns that sort of assist that adoption or that movement towards that better place? And then what inhibits our ability to grow and evolve and adapt? And then how can we help leaders? Many of us are coaches, make optimal choices around the definition and evolution of their process and practice. So these are sort of the backdrop for today's exploration. Let me throw the first poll out here and ask you, the listener, how long you've been using or applying or playing with Kanban. So if you can pull up your phone and vote, we will get some information coming at us. Okay, I figured we'd have a good number of senior folks in the room. Okay, we have a nice blend, it looks like. Excellent, thank you. Um, and here's the next question. What initially attracted you and maybe perhaps continues to attract you to Kanban? And if I'm remembering, I think this is a word cloud. We'll find out here in a moment what it is. It's either, I think it's got to be a word cloud because if it was open text, I think we'd have some, yep, okay. Yeah, it's a word cloud. And you're welcome to enter more things too. Oh, physics, interesting. No sprints. Okay. We have okay. Flow, freedom, and adaptability. Nice. And focus is also in play. Cool. Thanks for weighing in on that. That's very interesting. We're seeing patterns right now in our brains kind of emerging through these words. No estimates. Yeah, a couple people, someone said no estimates again. Less constrictive, continually evolving. Beautiful. Thanks for weighing in on that, folks. Frameworks are a word that we hear widely. I mean, it's a word we hear all the time. Kanban's often called a framework, even though the Kanban method, the company line is, we are not a framework. We'll get to that one in a minute. But frameworks really, in a lot of ways, drive modern business. And when I think of frameworks, I think of these visual, you know, um, you could say tools, you could say these visual diagrams, things like, jobs, pains, and gains, or lean canvas, or product trees. There's a lot of amazing and valuable and useful frameworks that we use in a lot of different ways. And we also have, what you might call process frameworks. So this is a little snapshot from a company in Chicago that always seems to present really thoughtful takes on things. And, it does list Kanban as a team level framework. And I suppose if you're using the term loosely, it's a frame of reference within which people work. It's something that gives us a common, way to understand something. Then, yeah, you could call Kanban a framework. Um, I don't know about the RIP frameworks. I wouldn't necessarily say those are not in practice because I believe they probably many of them are in practice. Um, but it's interesting to think about, team level frameworks, scaling frameworks, and then um, others. So when I talk about a process framework, I'm going to call that a structured approach with usually the goal of some kind of systematic or standard way of working, and some level of efficiency is often what drives a framework. The two frameworks that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to kind of lean into and look back on in different contexts, are Scrum and Safe. I cut my teeth as an agile practitioner in Scrum. When my first mentor was Ken Schwaber, and I followed him around the country for 4 months, and sat alongside him as he taught Scrum and assisted him in various things. I am not nearly as immersed or versed in Safe. I've been exposed to Safe a lot, but I don't have the any kind of certification or experience that would, qualify me to kind of be any sort of expert in Safe. I just sort of know what it offers in some ways, and I've seen the results of Safe. So here's a question I'd like to ask you. Scrum and Safe are very popular frameworks. They're widely adopted. What is it that makes them so popular and widely adopted? What is the appeal of a framework like Scrum or a framework like Safe? And I think this is another word cloud, if I'm remembering. Oh no, this is actually open. It's like yeah, there we go. Okay, it's not a word cloud. Somebody famously said so. Okay, Johnny says people don't have to think. I heard that before. It saves me from having to think too much. Yeah. Yeah. Follow the recipe. Yeah. Reduce liability. There's some convenient things about these frameworks for sure. One of the things I've appreciated about Scrum is the I would say the terminology that began to get me to think in an iterative, incremental way. And similarly, I think with Kanban, one of the things that I love about Kanban is the terminology. I love option pool versus backlog. It just has a more, this is a kind of a different kind of brain shifting way of saying things. Others are using it, so it must work. Okay, cool. Um, the common language, this is from Google's AI engine. And the reason I'm pointing this out is there's a couple of things that I think, that frameworks, that a process framework gives us. It establishes a common language. That's great. It's great as long as the language reflects how we want to work and helps us optimize our systems towards things. It might have a language that doesn't really serve us. If that's the case, then, and I've heard many people feel like sprinting as a term with Scrum is initially fun, but over time it feels like it's exhausting. So common language has pros and cons, you could say. Benchmarking, improving standardization and efficiency. Um, so I want to ground our conversation here with frameworks, with an experience I had last year, and I landed in January working with a company that it provides information services to academic institutions, to hospitals, to libraries. They're sort of an information services broker. And the business unit I landed with was providing information services to physicians and clinicians and nurses that were operating, that were serving patients at kind of what we call point of care. So they were pulling up information on their tablets to diagnose, to create treatment plans, to validate some of their, thinking or data. And this business unit, it showed up with the company I was working with at the time, and I'm still working with. The company was called Next Up Solutions, and the company's since been acquired by a company called Spritebulb Learning, which is the company I work with now as a training partner. But this company reached for Kanban after having been a safe shop for 6 years. And they provide an interesting, I think, story for us to kind of play with and lean on and lean into, um, because they got some benefits from this process framework that we call SAFe, and they also realized there were some shortcomings as well. So it's sort of a something to play against and ground our conversation kind of on a um, just over our time together. And Helen, speaking of time together, Helen, where are we, what are we shooting for? What do we want to conclude by here?
7:30 would be good.
Half seven. Okay, so about 40-ish minutes,
Yes,
30.
sorry. I just realized as soon as I said that that wasn't going to be the right for you.
That's good. That's fine. That's fine. I'll kind of pick up the pace a little bit to keep us moving. This was an 85 to 90 person business unit that had three products. Really, it was two products and a platform, but they had nine development teams ranging in size from, four to six, maybe seven. Each team had a set of developers, a product manager, a couple of product VPs, some program managers, solution architects. So it was really a self-contained business unit that was serving this particular segment of the market. Now, what was interesting was this particular business unit was originally one of 20 release trains. Now, these release trains were independently operating, but they were all kind of asked to be aligned with the process and using SAFe in a way that was determined by the Lean Agile Center of Excellence. So there were some protocols and rules, and I would say a pretty strict process they were trying to get folks to adhere to. And they had been doing this when I joined them for almost 8 years. Some of the milestones that preceded my time with them, related to migrating to the cloud, getting some new apps online for patients, getting new products launched in the cloud, introducing or incorporating some AI capabilities in 2023. And then I joined them in early 2024. And their challenges, having, these are the challenges that they presented as reasons for looking to Kanban. The first was just improving time to market. they were on a strict kind of quarterly planning cycle, and it took obviously the soonest they're going to get significant capabilities is going to be, there was stuff being released continuously, but the new capabilities were kind of big batch released on a quarterly basis. And then prior to that, the readiness, the approval, the budgeting also contributed to the latency there. And so it ended up being, 6 to 8 months to getting substantial features to market and being responsive enough to customers as well. They saw teams struggling with ownership and autonomy and lacking collaboration, within a given stream of work, within a given value stream. The timeline that I took with them was roughly 4-ish months, from January to late April, and then we concluded in May. And it was interesting because I taught a team Kanban practitioner workshop in January to 13, and the business unit VP attended with probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 of his direct reports, and then some other senior people. So they had a really senior group in the TKP, and they saw enough there to invest further in a KSD, a Kanban system design workshop, and then that led them to agree to do what we initially called an assessment, but we kind of reframed it as a discovery. I was certainly going in with some eyes on, understanding what their challenges were systemically and using Kanban to help address them. And, they liked the term assessment, and we eventually settled on discovery. Um, this was interesting. These were their first learning goals that they declared in the Team Kanban practitioner class, which was a virtual class that was taught in Miro. And what was interesting about this, in particular, was well over half of the class had an interest in sort of process transition. And they started saying things, well, how do we transition from safe to Kanban? How do we um, move from our current process to more of a Kanban process? And this was an interesting, you know, set of learning goals because, we often don't have as many folks curious about change management, but I think the fact that it was leaders and managers involved really prompted them to be thinking about, gosh, how do we take this business unit and move it in a direction that's going to result in some of these benefits like reduced time to market and more collaboration. And for whatever reason, they felt Kanban was a path to help them do that. I did think it was interesting too. One of the participants in that TKP really laid out the goal of having another framework for getting work done that might better engage developers, um, improve speed of delivery, value, and quality. And so this sort of mentality of where's the next framework that we can install to get results that we want, I think was something that was voiced here in this workshop. It was also pretty prevalent, I think, in the culture of the company. Um, I'm gonna sidestep this for a moment and kind of go back to Kanban. We'll come back to I kind of just want to set the stage with this particular group's challenge, and we'll come back to them after we do a Kanban refresher. So Kanban, as many of you know, is a method, not a framework, for managing and improving services that deliver knowledge work. So it has its roots in Lean, and it was codified by David Anderson in 2004, 2005 at Microsoft, and it's grown and evolved with many contributions from the community until, it stands today as something we employ. Many of us employ. I'm going to skip this Slido and just go straight to the Kanban method. If you're new to the Kanban method, this is sort of the infographic that's available on the Kanban University resources page. In the top left, we have change principles. In the top right, we have service delivery, and the bottom, we have general practices. And then around the border, we have the values. And Kanban specifically, in the FAQ that's available on the resources page, designates itself a method as opposed to a framework. So this is an important distinction because philosophically, the Kanban method seeks to help improvement happen and enable change and create a culture of continuous improvement in a way that's fundamentally different than either SAFe or Scrum. Um, this is a slide that I use when I contrast these two. And I think of Scrum, or I call Scrum, I mean, Scrum calls itself a process framework, and it's something that tells us how to work. And Kanban is a method of practices and principles that we apply to an existing workflow. So it has it has the same goal as Scrum in some ways, you know, but it has a different way of approaching and adopting, or you could say, um, going about its business. You could say the common goal is they both want to have a humane way of working, at least Scrum and Kanban. I don't know about the originators of, I spent no time with the originator of SAFe, and I don't know the sort of what impulse or what motivated the creators of SAFe to create their framework. But I know Ken Schwaber was really, at heart, an engineer and architect, much like I know David has a background in that as well, and really enabling people to do their best work in a way that was sustainable and to focus on value. So really, at the heart of, I think, Scrum and Kanban was the well-being and creative engagement of the workforce. And they're both designed to stimulate improvement, to reveal things that are keeping us, from doing our best work. And they both lean heavily and rely on transparency as a principle. The difference, that I call out often when I'm speaking about Kanban to new folks is sort of the approach that we take to change. And Kanban is the approach that we call it the start with what you do now approach. And this middle second change principle is the one that I want to ask you about as an audience. Because I think it's great on paper. I love the idea of gaining agreement to pursue improvement through evolutionary change. The question that I came up against with this business unit that I just call it a healthcare business unit just to genericize it, HBU, this 90-person organization, who needs to agree for healthy change to happen? And when I say healthy change, I mean change that's not going to be gone in 2 years, that's actually going to stick around, be accepted, be internalized by the group, by the organization, and become part of the culture. So here's my question to you. If you were leading that Kanban adoption that I described to you earlier, that I set the stage for, who do you think would need to be involved in the quote agreement to pursue improvement? In other words, what's the scope of the agreement? So for a Kanban to be properly adopted, who needs to be in the room making this? Whoa, that was fast. The first answer, whoever has a very fast trigger finger, they said everyone. That's cool. I like it. Let's see what else happens here. Okay, we have some jockeying. I feel like this is like the dot races at an NBA game. Okay, so it looks like we have some alignment around a core constituency of direct contributors being involved or being part of this um, improvement initiative, you could say. I'm curious, does anyone raise your hand or just come off of mute if you have any other thoughts or insights in what you see here? I think this is a really central question that many of us are up against often. Any other questions, comments? Aaron.
Yeah. So you don't list roles that are customer facing or have internal customer facing, whatever. I always tend to design everything around um, a customer first, even if it's internal, a centricity approach, and make sure I have the highest voting logic designed around that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Aaron. So the customer in your setting, if an improvement's going to be undertaken, let's get them in the room. And I think certainly some changes would be right in line with that. So thank you. Tomo?
I love the idea of a bottom-up change where the people doing it are the ones that organize it. But if you don't have it set up with the VP first, he'll torpedo the whole thing as soon as they start.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, Tomo. Russ?
Yeah, I try to approach the question slightly differently. So I don't necessarily seek to have agreement to pursue improvement, but I try and help, say, the team or department or whatever reflect on how they're currently working and just ask the question, is what they're doing now perfect or could it be improved? And usually there's some response of, well, yeah, it's okay, we're working, we're functioning, it's okay, but we could be better. There's always something that we could pursue for improvement. So it's more really trying to change the conversation about, do we agree that we could actually be better in the future?
Mm, yeah. I like that. Yeah. Reframing the conversation. Well said, Russ. In coming back to our business unit that I was working with, they were of the mind that the the VP and the leadership team were responsible for the process that was being deployed and evolved. They like the idea of Kanban, but at the end of the day, um, the Kanban philosophy, you could say, the change management approach, I don't think was fully realized or fully, embraced. Um, this formula, those Kanban practitioners here on the call also, or on the webinar, we're also aware that, a stressor is what enables us as coaches and leaders. And, to Russ's point, Russ asked the question, um, is what you're doing now perfect? That's a provocative question. That's in some ways a stressor. It could be, it could be a way of acknowledging or confronting that there could be a reason to improve or change. As Kanban practitioners, coaches, um, one of the most important services we offer, I think, and I felt like this was the case with this business unit that I was serving, was to really just allow them to come into alignment, to raise some questions, to show them some data, and to let them reflect and come to some agreements on their own and really take action and hopefully from an aligned place as well. So as you know, if you've been in Kanban, we leverage cadences as sort of a regular way to bring these stressors into view and to encourage reflection. So it's a natural place to have the formula kind of being um, practiced, you could say. But I would also say just the spirit of going in and working with this group of the VP and his leadership team of maybe 8 to 10 people total. My stance was really I'm here to help you reflect and make some decisions as a group. So I kind of had that kind of Kanban coach hat on as opposed to an advice giver or an expert kind of advising them on process. And I sometimes forget this. I just want to mention Kanban is really a complete toolbox. The method and the formula together are really all you need to take that journey. And when I first moved to just as recently as 5 years ago, first moved to Calgary, I kind of I think I was overthinking things. And I'm lucky enough to live about 5 kilometers from Dave White, and he would remind me often not to overthink things. That Kanban is a complete toolbox and it has everything that we need to evolve and help our clients evolve in their work. So I want to talk a little bit about the forces at play that I observed in this business unit, and then also, provoke some of your thinking around maybe some of the same forces. I don't want to get too deep down the rabbit hole of what is Agile. I just want to share a slide that I shared when I was at Collins Aerospace some years ago, and I was asked by the enterprise tooling person to give me a slide on Agile and explain it in 3 minutes or less. So this is what I came up with. I came up with business and technology working together with customers at the forefront, kind of good place to have our attention, focus on value. It could be cost savings, could be revenue gains, risk reduction, learning, working in small batches, using feedback, and with self-organizing teams. So this was sort of my Agile in a nutshell. And I've kind of come back to this, in different settings because to me, there's a level of partnership that sort of this diagram represents. We have some business technology people, or whether it's leaders or team members, and there's a sense of being in it together with a focus on customers and value delivery. So it's a little different than what's in you might find in the Agile Manifesto, but it's one perspective on what I kind of consider the essence of Agile. And the relational dynamic or the bigger force that I would say is often at work in realizing the gains of Agile is this level of partnership where we have the business and technology people both appreciating the different worlds that each comes from and having a willingness to kind of navigate those worlds together. Um, Brendan likes to call them stakeholders and makers. There's a tension there often between people that want things built and built quickly and people that are creative and innovative and brilliant enough to actually make them and do them in a high quality way. Customers, developers as well. So this idea of partnership is sort of central to, um, I would say, healthy adoption or healthy embrace of change. And self-organization in and of itself, which allows these two parties to come together, can be in and of itself challenging. We have enterprises that want structure and standards, and teams that are promised via Agile agency and ownership. So enterprise and team, there's a tension there often. A book that I've had on my shelf for over 25 years talks about bureaucracy and democracy, sort of the arm wrestle that goes on in organizations that are really seeking to change and improve from the bottom up. This picture's from some of you may recognize this from Henrik Nyberg's video, Agile Product Ownership in a Nutshell. And this is another one of those videos I've gone back to. I mean, sort of another one of those diagrams I've gone back to again and again. So it sort of carries that partnership dynamic on the top two rings. And the bottom one represents a coach who is enabling these partners, these parties to work together and work more expeditiously, be faster, build things fast. We learn fast together. We get feedback from the market. We have, fast flow, and we're doing it together. So there's a level of partnership. So one of the healthy functions in, settings like this business unit is having that neutral party that's able to help the business and technology people work effectively. I'm going to pause for a second here, and I'm going to move past this really quick because let's see. Okay. I want to come back to, I want to leave time for Q&A. We're coming up against, so I'm going to skip ahead. So the outcomes this particular organization was having were the biggest one was just lead times. Lead times for epics. The other one was consistency of deliverables. They were having a lot of work in progress, kind of when you have that quarterly planning cycle, there's a lot of stuff that gets smashed in at the boundary. Get it crammed in at the end and get it, spun up at the beginning. And they were missing things. They had some quality issues and architects were overburdened on the boundaries. The other thing was just teams that were struggling to just collaborate. And I think the big challenge was having that middle tier of the organization, the program leadership, struggling to both take in the strategy and represent it as epics, and then parcel the work out in a way that was, smooth and predictable and encouraged flow and team ownership. So these are some of the things that we did over the course of the 4 months together. I deployed a survey. I did one-on-one interviews by Zoom. I observed a lot of their safe events. We had, round tables which brought developers into the conversation. I sat down with each team and had conversations about what was going on and where it was going and what their concerns were and what they were motivated by and what they were demotivated by. And then we did a lot of work in Miro as well. Some of these challenges I think we had about half of the population complete the survey. So out of a 90-person group, maybe 40, 45, which was pretty good. We were pretty happy with that. Communication showed up as a challenge, prioritization, some of these things you might imagine accompanied the bigger, I guess these were sort of the challenges that contributed to longer lead times. Priorities, communication, the big one that was interesting was just a lack of context and a lack of ownership, um, and priority sequencing confusion at the team level. That was sort of one of the big challenges. Feature readiness, this was sort of developer challenges, having ownership of components versus, value streams, trust, communication, and clarity. So you can tell there was some challenges with how leadership was sort of the culture. There was a I would say a good bit of command and control in the culture. And so it was interesting to have this leadership team reach for Kanban with a fundamentally different way of leading change, driving change, and then over the course of days or weeks, decide that we're going to deploy Kanban org-wide in this particular way. So that was the challenge. Uh, Travis Birch, who I met in 2016 in Washington, D.C. at the Lean Kanban North America conference, he called SAFE a ticket out of chaos. A ticket out of chaos. Um, it was very convenient for, I think, a lot of organizations that were in a level of chaos that was probably much like this other group that I worked with. My question to you is, if SAFE is a ticket out of chaos, what's the price of that ticket? What are you giving up to adopt Scaled Agile Framework? Let's kind of weigh in on that. I don't think this could be a word cloud, but I think it's open. I think it's actually an open, nope, it is a word cloud. Okay. You're giving up agility. Okay. Let's see what the word cloud tells us. I feel like I'm a little bit of a warlock looking in a crystal ball when I when I do the word cloud here. Losing agility. Uh-oh. That doesn't sound good. Okay. Okay. Interesting. ML01, ML12. So are you giving up maturity levels? Oh yeah, I guess you are. If you adopt safe, I guess you're giving up certain ways of working that maybe are less mature. Okay. Well, we got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to keep us moving. This is interesting. I'd love to pause here and talk more. This one of the things that really supported this group's thinking and gave me hope initially was they really enjoyed Klaus Leopold's flight levels. It felt like a really handy way for them to have conversations around scaling, and it really made it easy to kind of paint the picture of this muddy middle that they were contending with. So at the heart of their problems was value streams that were all flowing together, and this was, at least in my perspective, lack of clear value streams and an unwillingness to let teams sort of take ownership of work items or epics in a value stream and move them down without a bunch of intervention. So they had some strengths going for them, this particular organization. They had a willingness to grow, seemingly, and especially in the lower portions of the organization, they had a passion for the mission. It was the medical industry. Their work could potentially save lives and make people's suffering decrease. They have a very career-aligned workforce, very engaged people. And they were a startup for a number of years back in the early 20, I think around 2010. So they kind of had this DNA in their culture already of kind of being able to work together um, in sort of a non-siloed way, just to be more dynamic and responsive. And they also had really smart people in the room. So the problem was they had really smart people. And that's kind of a joke, but not really. Um, if you want to be the smartest person in the room, go to Accenture, go to PwC, go somewhere where you can be the smartest person in the room and sell your knowledge for the highest possible price. If you want to be a Kanban practitioner, you got to turn the volume down on your intelligence and let the client and their teams turn the volume up on their own. That's something I've had to learn over the years. Uh, Strangely enough, they fired all their Scrum Masters before they brought me on board. This was like 4 months before I joined them. And I think they claimed that they did this because Kanban says no prescribed roles. And they interpreted that as, oh, we must not need roles. And so they fired their Scrum Masters. Um, I think it was more of a budgetary thing, but that was their justification. It was interesting anyway. Um, this leadership's being sort of communicative, consistently there, listening, really conveying the why behind any kind of change. That was one of the big challenges. And then this idea of the muddy middle, they have these program managers that are, taking ownership of the strategic goals and manifesting them as epics and not allowing sort of streams to exist and kind of um, flow of their own accord. And then related to that, this willingness to distribute authority and leadership. So those were sort of the big challenges that this group was up against. They're kind of laid out a little bit more here. I'm not going to go into that. But the recommendation I had, and there's certainly many ways to skin the cat, but was really to get them to take ownership of these value streams, get teams appropriately aligned in the upstream, um, build transparency in, get leaders communicating strongly and more consistently. So all the things that probably anyone it's sort of common sense. A lot of these things are, you look at this and, of course it makes sense. And I think they saw this as pretty common sense recommendations, and they seem to be interested and willing to take them to heart. What ended up happening was they decided to take the Kanban method as they perceived it and create a structure or a process that they basically said, this is the way we're going to work, and then start to assess performance of teams on the basis of lead times and a few other metrics. And so sort of they installed, you know, Kanban as a top-down process. And this was one of the things that in my closing, session with them in early May, I said, this approach you're taking, is really risky. And there was 5 risks that I called out here and that related to different things. But the one risk that I think is the most, I think, striking for me was taking, a method that's not a framework and treating it like a framework and saying we're going to fast track Kanban. We're going to actually lay out this process and we're going to install it across all these teams and tell them this is what you're doing now, and sort of an all at once big bang evolution. So I'm going to pause here because I know we got 6 minutes to go, Helen, is that right?
Give or take, I'm happy to stay as long as people want to stay.
Yeah.
But just be mindful they might have work they have to go to around the world.
Sure, sure. Well, let me kind of get us over here to the last Slido, which is related to just Q&A. I guess this is the question. Actually, there's 2 questions. Let's just go with this one. This one I think is kind of the more Interesting one. How can leaders and teams make good choices, optimal choices around defining and evolving their process? So I want to kind of lay this out as a kind of a Q&A. Actually, it's not a Q&A. It's an open question, and we'll see what people. I guess the question is, what are the factors that enable leaders and teams to make good choices? And when I say optimal choices, the choices that give them some of the outcomes they're after. So how would you advise leaders and teams? How would you support them? Experiment, yeah. Hmm. Good input. Okay, I'm going to call this done from my side and just open it up for comments or questions in the last few minutes.
Okay, so what questions have we got? Tomo, over to you.
So I've tried SAFe a few times, and to my experience, the big problem is the length of the PI. It's just too big to get an iteration and experiment. So there really isn't any experiments. You just don't get there. It takes too long. Have you got the same experience?
I think that having that time box, it fixes our thinking in terms of what's possible, and it also creates a lot of latency in that feedback and experimentation loop, like you're saying, Tomo. So yeah, um, I think you're spot on with that observation.
We can try 4 experiments this year, and that's all we have time for.
Right on, Tim.
Yeah. So I was just wondering when an organization makes a change like this, was there still a lot of safe residue? Like there were still some safe tendencies while trying the Kanban method? Like whatever, like if they had like I don't know safe, but if it had like a sprint cycle or something like that, like an iteration, like did you
Yeah.
find that it was kind of hard to shake off
Oh
some
yeah.
of the old method to do the new method?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when I came to Kanban from Scrum, this idea of suddenly, release the time box. I'm like, well, how are we going to plan? There's a lot of
Right.
disorientation initially when you step into kind of a flow-based model. And so I think that was present here, and I think that what you're describing, Tim, was probably what they made them kind of reach for more of a, oh, we're going to take this and install it quickly because we like the idea of flow, we like responsiveness, we like, speed, and this is going to happen if we just install Kanban across the board. And so it was like looks good on paper, but when you start doing it, it's a lot of disorientation, and I think the big carryover was this, sort of anxiety around dealing with what's right in front of them and sort of having to kind of have that plan in place that's months long. Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Russ?
Sure.
Yeah, so the last slide you presented was that risk of treating Kanban like it's a click to install methodology. How did they respond? What's the next chapter in the story? What did they do next?
Well, they ran out of budget. Apparently, they ran out of budget after the discovery session. I didn't. It's funny, Russ, because it doesn't feel like it landed. It was sort of a big, bold risk that I called out. I didn't try and make them sit down, and I didn't try and force feed them. I basically just presented the risk. I said, "Do you have any questions on any of these risks? Is there anything else you want to talk about further?" And they didn't say anything. So I didn't force the issue. My sense is that it didn't really land in a way that made them kind of curious or cautious. They said, "We're doing this, right? As I said, leadership mentality. Like I've been rewarded for so many years having the answers and doing the right thing. I can't suddenly step away from that. That was my sense of like the few last few days of our time together.
So
Yeah.
those outcomes that they were seeking right at the beginning of the story, which was how do we transition from safe to Kanban, they still had that mentality, right? They were still
Yeah.
thinking that same way.
Yeah. There's a destination called Kanban. We want to get there quickly, and we're the leaders, so we're gonna reach forward in time, grab Kanban, bring it back here, and install it right away. So we're
Mm,
suddenly there, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Arno?
Tomo.
One of the things that I found useful is if you can get some good metrics right away and make them big. I mean, you want a nice big gauge on the wall that has things like, delivery time or,
Hmm.
nice big customer measurable things like that. If you can get that up early, then you could start saying, oh, the needle's going up, the needle's going down. And if you
Hmm.
never have that common vision, all the frameworks look alike.
Yeah.
It's just philosophy. But if you can get the needle and you can say, why doesn't that needle go up? Well, it took us 4 days to write the spec, and then it took us 2 days to approve it, and then it took us there, and then we had to wait for the team. Like, why did it take that long? Oh, now you've got the right question.
Yeah. That's a good point. And looking back, my own experience, that was probably one of my biggest regrets was not getting hard data more quickly because I ended up giving them baseline metrics for features and capabilities, but getting that in front of them sooner and using that as a catalyst for thinking, and presenting, kind of measuring progress on the path to change was something I wish I would have done earlier.
So that was going to be my question. So what would you wish you'd have done differently? So obviously the data part of it. Is there anything else that you learn on this journey that you're like, oh, I'm going to remember that and I'm not going to fall into that trap again next time, which might be useful for us so we don't fall into that same trap?
Um, honestly, Helen, I don't think so. The big thing was maybe I would have had a better chance of creating some a leadership willingness to kind of be a little bit less clingy to process and imposing a process if we had a solid metrics baseline earlier and some ways to measure progress as we make these experiments happen. The other thing is, I mean, ultimately, like many people have said, experimentation is key. And I would love for them to have taken a single product and maybe a subset, maybe a handful of the teams, two or three teams, and go deep and run, work a value stream, a single value stream, and then learn from that and apply it to the other value streams. And I just had a hard time shifting into that sort of conversation. But it was just another reminder that, it's their journey and I'm a guide and I'm a catalyst and I just, ultimately, um, I'm there to serve them. And in some ways, I guess I did serve them in building some awareness. Um, but no, metrics would be the big thing that I wish I would have done earlier. Um, yeah.
And I don't know like how long ago this case study was from, but like where are they now in their evolution?
So I talked to them Thanksgiving last year. So late November, early December last year, and they said they're still having a lot of struggles. Teams are really grappling with flow metrics. And it's interesting because I think teams have fallen into this trap of like plan, iteration, deliver, plan, iteration, deliver. So this sort of lockstep way of working. And this idea of, measuring lead time for a story or an epic or whatever, and work in progress, levels. It just they don't see the purpose of it. Why should I do that when I'm just getting my to-do list, doing my stuff, and then looking at it at the end? So their teams are struggling. They don't have that neutral force, that sort of coach-ish presence that doesn't always have to be a scrum master or flow manager. It could be someone else. But I think they have a really great a woman is leading this initiative, and I have a lot of faith in her. So I think they're still sputtering down the runway, Helen, in short.
Continued evolution.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I do find sometimes that like places that I work in, they're reluctant to do that flow data as well. But there's normally like there's a fear there or there's something. But I
yeah,
also think that it's not the be all and end all, because sometimes you can just feel the improvement. I know that doesn't like cut checks or demonstrate things really, but you can also get that sense of achievement of what's changing through that people watching, as I like to call, because you can see them evolve their behaviors as well, can't you?
yeah.
What else? What other questions have we got for Kurt? Grill him while he's here. No one. Alexi, Dave, come on, you must have an insightful question. Really
Or
test him.
Lexi probably has an insightful comment, I'm sure, or maybe Craig Strong does, or Dave White.
No
Give his wiser
question.
wisdom
I
as
just want
Yoda's.
to clap and thank Kurt.
I tried, Alexi. I tried with them, but at the end of the day, they took Kanban and they made it into something else.
Isn't that okay if they made it into something else?
I suppose, right? I mean, it's their recipe, it's their kitchen, right? They're in the kitchen doing the work, and if customers like what they're cooking and they want to throw in some new ingredients, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're
Yeah.
getting a good pasta carbonara at the end of it and your customers are happy with that, what does it matter if there's a few eggs broken on the floor?
Good attitude, Ellen. Good attitude.
Tomo?
I just wanted to add that having a good idea, plan, structure, methodology is good, but if no one's going to change, it's all pretty useless. And so if you haven't read Esther Derby's book, it was only 6 rules for change when I read it, but 7 now. It's a really great concept in how to get people to actually do something differently. That is the hard part, I think.
Yeah. Great resource. Thank you.